Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank Peter. That was a really excellent presentation, and it certainly got our panel's attention because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about this morning. I want to thank all of you for being here and for taking time from your schedule to participate in this conversation that we're going to have this morning. And we should also acknowledge that we are in the Coast Salish territory, and so I want to thank the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations for allowing us into their territory. Now, before I begin our panel, or before I introduce our panel this morning, I wanted to mention that we got to know each other by working together as members of the Premier's LNG Working Group. Now, this group was focused on workforce issues and skills development. You may have seen that our report to the Premier and Minister Bond has been placed on your tables. I also want to point out that the report contains 15 recommendations that the group felt were important, and I'm very happy to say that the Premier has accepted all 15 of those recommendations. I encourage you to take a look at the report that's on your table, and if you need an extra copy, we can get you one, or you can find it on the ministry's website. Now, one other point I want to make about the working group is that there were a number of other companies and organizations that were represented, one of which was the Haisla Nation. Unfortunately, while we would love to have had all of the participants on the working group up with us this morning, the stage is simply not large enough to accommodate all of the participants. But we have assembled what I think is a very experienced and well-versed panel for today's conversation. Now, the members of our panel are, and I'll introduce them. First is, to my left, is Mr. Tom Sigurdsson. Tom has been connected with the BC building trades for more than 20 years and currently serves as the Executive Director of the British Columbia and Yukon Territory Building and Construction Trades Council. Next to Tom is Mr. Jim Sinclair. Jim is President of the BC Federation of Labour, which is an umbrella organization that represents 54 unions and 500,000 public and private sector employees throughout the province. Next to Jim is Mr. Mark Olson. Mark is the business manager and the secretary-treasurer for the Labourers Union, Local 1611. Next to Mark is Mr. Mark Misael. Mark is the senior project manager for Shell's LNG Canada project. He is responsible for the technical development and construction of the LNG facility. And last, but certainly not least, is Ms. Sarah McCullough. Sarah is Director of External Affairs and Communications for Spectra Energy, and Spectra, of course, is our partner, our pipeline partner in the construction of our LNG plant in Prince Rupert. Now, the development of the LNG industry in British Columbia presents the province and its people with tremendous opportunities. But there are also challenges that must be met if we are to ensure that the industry does in fact develop. One of these challenges is related to our panel discussion today, which is LNG workforce development. I remember during one of the group's early meetings that we all agreed that one of our goals should be to ensure that jobs go to British Columbians first, Canadians second, and then expand to other countries. To do that, we have to ensure that the government, industry, organized labor, the trades, and First Nations all work together. If not, we may never realize the full potential that this opportunity presents to us, to our children, and to our grandchildren. Our plan this morning is to have a conversation about workforce issues and what should be done to ensure that our workforce is ready and able to seize the jobs that will become available as a result of the LNG opportunity. And when I say having a conversation, I really, really want you to be a part of that conversation. All of us on the stage have been working together for 7 or 8 months. We've had these conversations, so now we'd like for you to be a part of that. Now, but before we begin, one final thing I would like to do is to ask each member of the panel to spend a few minutes to let you know why they're here and why they think this is important. So now I'll turn it over to Tom.
Well, thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. I, too, want to thank the First Nations communities, not only in the Lower Mainland, but throughout British Columbia, where we're going to be hopefully doing a lot of work and projects on their traditional lands. I look forward to visiting those places very soon. I also want to thank the Government of British Columbia for the opportunity, not only for today, but for having pulled together the working group. It was a valuable experience for all of us, and I think we learned a lot from each other on a going forward basis. So I particularly want to address recommendations 2 to 10 from that working group, because those really focus in on training opportunities for British Columbians, both rural and urban, First Nations, non-traditional groups in our society, because those are the groups that we're going to have to reach out to in order to make certain that we have a skilled workforce. I think one of the reasons that we were invited to participate on that working group is because the building trades has had a successful model for training over the many decades that we've been involved in building British Columbia. We achieve about an 85 to 90% graduation or completion rate through our training centers. One of the reasons that we're able to achieve that is because, quite frankly, once we have an apprentice in the system, we make certain that they have some guidance getting through to their level of journey worker status. So we'll bring them in for their 6 weeks of theory, send them out to the workforce, they'll get their 1,600 hours of on-tool training, and then they come back to the class for their subsequent theory sessions. These placements are extremely important, but the fact of the matter is, in British Columbia, we haven't got enough placements for these young people who have entered the apprenticeship system. We have to do more. We actually have young people waiting to get into an apprenticeship system, but we won't take them in until we can actually know that they're going to be placed in work opportunities so that they can hone the skills that they learn in the class. And that includes the province of British Columbia. The province has to accept the responsibility for finding places for young people who enter the apprenticeship system to go out and work and ply their trade. Health boards, school boards, crown corporations, they have to accept the responsibility and start hiring apprentices. And the government has to do that now. We need those first and second year apprentices in place so that when we get to final investment decisions and shovels in the ground on LNG projects, those first and second year apprentices become third and fourth year apprentices on the LNG sites. I'm going to stop there and join in the discussion later.
Okay. Jim?
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. I think this committee was an extremely useful for myself, and I think for the Labour movement to sit with First Nations, to sit with the people who experience building these projects, and to sit with the government and say, okay, this is, by all estimations, the biggest energy projects we're going to do in our lifetime. And does that mean we can keep doing what we've done for years in terms of building them, and we've built a number of them, or do we have to do something different? And I think what I experienced over the last 6 months was something different. And that difference was we sat down and said, okay, what's our first objective? Our first objective is to put people to work in British Columbia and make sure they have the skills and the training to do that. And we said, going from that, how do we proceed to make that actually happen? And I think that was the focus of our conversation, and now it's the focus of going forward to how do you make it happen. I liked what I saw from Australia. Every time he put down what a successful project was, we had a list. I learned a couple of things. One is, there's an urgency here. We're already behind. If we really want to make sure every single British Columbian who wants that job and wants those skills has a chance, we have to speed up what we're doing, not slow down. The second point, and I want to talk about later, is we can either do it two ways, really. We can have cooperation, collaboration, just as we discussed, or we can have competition, we can have chaos, and we can have conflict. And we're all good at that second part. How good are we going to be at the first part is the question. And I think really that's what we concluded. The number one conclusion we'll talk about is how do we go forward from here so we're not duplicating, falling over each other, wasting time, and that all the players are at the table making the decision. So I'm excited about this because I think we're starting on a course that may not just change how we do LNG, but change how we do skills training in British Columbia for all projects.
Great, thanks, Jim. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll just make a brief introduction. So as head of the Labour's Union here in British Columbia, we're one of 14 craft-based construction unions in BC. No doubt about it, all 14 unions will play a significant role in the development of LNG, the industry in British Columbia. So that's why I'm excited and honored not only to be up here, but to be a part of the Premier's LNG working group and working with these great individuals and others as well. Now, this is the issue, though. It goes beyond an opportunity, which we all hope happens in British Columbia. I think everyone in this room and those that are not here yet this morning, we really share a responsibility. It goes well beyond an opportunity. It's a responsibility. So just touching a bit more on what Jim talked about, our responsibility is to create a new generation of construction workers. So not only to maximize the amount of Canadian participation, local, Aboriginal, BC, women right across the country, but beyond that, to build the next generation of construction worker. And that's what I look forward to participating in and being a part of, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mark. Mark, with a C.
Thank you, David. As the project manager responsible for delivering the LNG plant that we propose in Kitimat, I would say workforce development and availability of skilled labor is really left, right, and center on my mind. In the end, it's people that build projects and not spreadsheets or PowerPoints. Many of you have seen that we announced the award of the main contract this week to CFSW LNG contractors. What you might not know is that we traveled to Kitimat with LNG Canada management and CFSW management to sign a social performance charter in the presence of the mayor of Kitimat, representation from the Haisela Nation, and business people and local stakeholders. And what is the significance of that? It is that we as LNG Canada and CFSW commit that the local northern British Columbia people will benefit from the project, and that covers both employment of local qualified people as well as the involvement of competitive First Nation and local businesses. And that is where you turn, I think, the discussion that we've had in the working group into actionable plans, and I'm committed as a project manager of the LNG plant to do my bit here. Picking up on the point that Tom made, we are in fact, as we speak, working together with organized labor, with umbrella organizations of contractors like CLRBC and actual employers to identify those positions where we can recruit and place local talented people who have a job, and then that job serves as the runway to progress through their apprenticeship. So it is not only supporting training of the people, it is also providing the job where they can have their hands-on tools and the hours to in fact complete their apprenticeship. I think the Premier really identified very well the complexity of workforce development, and that it is too big an opportunity for any of us, how influential we might be, to really solve this issue. And that's why I'm looking forward as the representative of LNG Canada, together with organized labor, First Nations, government, and the contractors associations, to use this report, this very good report that I indeed recommend you read. Now pull up our sleeves and make it into actionable plans, that we have bums on seat and we realize the opportunity.
Mark, thank you. Sarah?
Thanks, David. There are a couple of reasons, we've touched on a few that are important for us to participate in this working group. The first, as we develop our new project with BG Group, it's important that we participate in these kinds of collaborative efforts to ensure, as all the panelists have said, that we deliver on the LNG opportunity in a way that benefits British Columbians. Secondly, for us at Spectra, we want to share the results of this collaboration with the folks across our BC business, which has been working in the province for almost 6 decades. My job is to share the insights and ideas of this group with the team in British Columbia, but also share with this team some of the experience in education and skills training that have been successful for our business. It's about listening, it's about learning, it's about reflecting the input of this group into our project development process, and it's an approach that we use across Spectra Energy every day.
Great, thank you. Now, as we begin, I'd like to kick things off by asking the members of the panel a question that's related to the 15 recommendations. The first of the 15 recommendations said, in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, that the working group should continue after its expiration date of March 31st, which was the date that we submitted our final report to the Premier. Now, in addition to the workforce group continuing, we also said that there should be a structure that could be or should be established in coordination with other LNG workforce activities that are already underway. Jim, if I could ask you, and I'll go then through the rest of the panel, but if I could ask you to begin with, what does that mean to you?
It means to me that it is a different kind of project, and we need to do it differently. And that it was our #1 overarching recommendation. And it said if we do not coordinate our work and set up a structure to do that on the ground, then we will fail. I want to read this. The working group is of the view that a fragmented and uncoordinated approach to the skills training and workforce planning issues could inhibit the success of LNG projects, creating ineffective approaches to training and risk of an increased cost. Let me add the other phrase to that, from my point of view, and a failure of the project to deliver for British Columbians. So what does that mean? We said, okay, who needs to be at the table directing this? First Nations. Critical to any successful story will be participations of First Nations. Labor. We have a huge history in training and building projects, need to be there. The proponents, the people making the decisions about what they're going to do and how they're going to build, need to be there. And the government agencies, et cetera, that are involved in delivering training, et cetera, need to be there. So we established a principle for this, was equal representation from all of those organizations at the table, running this organization, which will mean that British Columbians will be able to see and get clear information about the possibilities. It will be coordinated and not fragmented. And we just have to do this. And everything I heard about Australia, and I've heard about Australia, was that that was one of the failures, and we can get ahead of this. The other point, I think, is that we're going to not just do this before the project. This committee and this working group will continue through all the projects. It actually is going to oversee a major commitment. The 25% of the apprenticeable trades will be apprentices. This is a major goal that we've set for ourselves, so that we're not just building a pipeline and a plant, we're building British Columbia. Right. And to me, that's the legacy of all of this, is doing that. And finally, that committee and that group will look at all training, all skills, not just apprenticeable ones, and the finished product. How will we run the plants? Will local people run the plants, or will we have to bring people in? So those are really where I think we were coming from. And I felt that at the end of that, wherever we came from around that table, whether we were from the First Nations community, the labor community, or the proponents themselves, we all came on the same page. That was exciting.
Mark, would you
Thank
like
you, David. Just a couple additional comments. Is the first proposal talking about structure? It really highlights the fact that although all the parties were there working together, the key party that needed to be there and were there and will continue to be there is the provincial government. And that's the major takeaway that I took from working on the committee, because this is such a gigantic opportunity, and usually industry, I'm not going to say usually, all the time, industry and labor have the same interests. We want to build stuff. Just like my 2 young sons who have Lego at home, what do they want? They want to build stuff. That's what we're here to do. But we needed government, and they have stepped up to be not only an important part of it, but to be fully engaged and participative, and providing major assistance to the working group. Obviously, government will be a major part of the committee, along with proponents, labor, First Nations. And so I want to thank the provincial government. That's a major takeaway that I took, because we need government help for funding for additional apprenticeship spaces, for ensuring there are a proper level of apprentices on government projects around the province. So as the pit crew just talked about, was we need to also backfill jobs as we build the LNG industry. So I appreciate the government's support and involvement. Thanks, Dave.
Sarah?
Well, I think just to echo that point, we had some pretty ambitious timelines, and I want to extend my thanks to the provincial government for supporting us as we met those. That's what we need. We wanted to start now, we wanted to start early, and if you look at the first recommendation, it's that we have a structure in place fairly quickly. We need to move quickly together, and we need to collaborate. So I just wanted to echo that we want to start early.
Mark Basile, anything?
Yeah, and I think you get the common ground from the panel here. We have worked together over the past number of months coming up with the recommendations, but the recommendations don't get any jobs in place. And now it is really continuing the collaboration that we had with, indeed, government, First Nations, unionized labor, LNG proponents, and we bring in, of course, the contractor organizations and the employers to turn it into actionable plans and real bums on seat. That's only when we can convince ourselves and the audience, I think, that we are making a difference. So the sense of urgency is here, and let's do it.
Tom?
Well, just during the working group, you know, we had lots of occasions where we came together, we pushed each other, we developed the level of respect that we had for each other. We had some trust concerns, I think, in the initial meetings. We got over that, but there's so much more work that's going to have to take place over the next couple of years, and we've just got to continue on with that working group so that we don't lose that trust, that respect. We need to plan for this, and that working group's going to be able to do an awful lot of that planning.
Great, thank you. Another question, and then I'm going to go to the, some of the cards here in just a moment, but another question is, how important is workforce development for you personally and for the success of the LNG projects? And Mark Maciel, I'll ask you to take that one as a lead.
Thanks, David. I would say I'm a people person, and in the engagement that I have with people in northern British Columbia, I haven't spoken to your sons yet, but quite a few people say, okay, I have a daughter or a son, they're interested in the LNG industry, but will they have a job? And my reply is, can I have their name? Or can I have their Twitter account? Because yes, there will be a job. It is very clear that the opportunity is so large that anybody interested and is now making decisions in their career to go for an apprenticeable trade or do a technical study or really invest in their career to be ready, this is the time. Don't wait. And that is, I think, what makes it so exciting for me to be part of this and to be here for the 5-7 years during construction. But let's not forget the sustainable jobs that will be thereafter for 25-30 years, where you have operators, you have maintenance people, you have the service companies that will be involved in this industry. It is fantastic to be part of it, David.
And any other panel members that might want to, Sarah?
Well, and just I think it's important that organizations like ours have the resources inside our organizations to support the inclusion of British Columbians from all communities across British Columbia. In our organization, we have dedicated resources looking at local and Aboriginal inclusion in our project. And we've also looked back into the supply chain, and I'm sure you're doing the same thing, to make sure that we're ready for that inclusion as we move forward through the project.
Tom?
Well, this is very much what we're all about, people. And we're going to be able to take young people in, give them the skills that they want to develop so that they're going to be job ready. But this is an opportunity for a lot of our organizations to bring in new blood. Our demographics show that we're getting an aging workforce and an aging membership. We need to make certain that we pass on the skills so that we're going to have people that are ready, highly skilled to take on the jobs that are going to be out there.
Okay. Jim? Or?
I'm a little more cautionary. I think that there may be a job for everybody that wants one, but there may not be. And that there's certain sets of skills we need in order to work on these projects. And I think we have to be realistic with British Columbians about what they need to do to get to that point. And we need to be very clear, not about this project or that project, but what is the overall opportunity here and how do we staff those jobs? So I think we have to really be conscious on top of this every day about what possibilities exist and how to take advantage of them. And I don't want to set expectations too high. I don't want everybody to think this is going to solve all our problems, because it won't. But it can be a real help in solving many of the long-term problems. And I don't want people to have expectations and have them not met so that this is a bad experience for them.
Right.
And we already have that in some cases, and we need to really be on top of that. And if we're together, all of us working on this, we can do that.
Great. Mark, do you have anything?
Just a final comment. Walking through the exhibition area yesterday, and I'm sure we'll all do this after the session today, it was very encouraging to see all the young people coming through and getting, for most of them, well, probably for all of them, the first time exposure to even the idea of working in the construction industry, in particular the LNG related industry. So it was very positive, and I believe there'll be literally 1,000 or more grade 12 students going through. And so hopefully, this is back to the proponents and the government, but hopefully some of these projects will proceed, and the individuals, the kids that came through yesterday, the rest of the week will get a real opportunity. It's exciting.
I'm going to take a question from the floor here, which sort of follows on to what you were talking about, Mark, about youth. In Alberta, students who are dropping out of high school to get a labor job. What is the strategy to keep them in school and then moving on into an apprenticeship role? So, Tom, you want to?
Well, when we go into some of the smaller communities, we talk about the job opportunities that are there, and they are going to have to stay in school in order to get certain levels. They need math. They need some physics in some of the trades. They are going to have to stay in school to get that level of education before they're coming into the trades. So we tell people, stay in school, get the education. It starts here. And then once you've graduated or you have achieved a particular level, then we can look after you and bring you in.
Mark?
Well, that's a great question, and this is another reason I like the exhibition area, because that area goes beyond construction jobs. So the message to kids too, well, we don't want anyone to drop out of school, but the message to kids too, if the LNG opportunities come to fruition, there'll be jobs in engineering, there'll be jobs in human resources, there'll be jobs in labor relations. There are many jobs well beyond being on the tools, and that was the message sent downstairs yesterday, and that's the message we need to get out to the local community as well. It's not just construction related, it's all the additional technical and IT and other skills you need, and you need a post-secondary high school education to achieve that.
Great, thank you, Mark. Sarah?
Well, and I think one of our recommendations was to look at what's working and how we can build upon that. So where do we not need to recreate the wheel? And some of the dual crediting programs where you have a pathway from high school to trades or to technology or some of those support opportunities as well is something we'll be looking at and we need to look at to make sure that we have kids that are staying in school and seeing themselves building a pathway, a runway to trades.
And there's a second part to this question as well, and that is, what is the strategy to make sure that Aboriginals have basic life skills to move on to gainful employment? Anybody want to?
Well, I think the best people to talk about that are Aboriginal people. But we did have that discussion. It's one of our recommendations, and I think that one of our challenges will be to provide that and to work with Aboriginal communities to make sure that we're giving them what they need to make sure that happens. And that can be said for a lot of young people. What is our job to make sure they get those skills to level? I mean, it's important to keep a context for this. There have been many jobs in this province where there's been building large construction jobs where some people have gotten jobs for $25 and $30 an hour, driving truck and doing things like that, all good jobs. But when a job finishes, then the job in town driving is only worth $12 or $15. So we have to see this as a chance to take the skill level that exists and move it up to a higher level so that at the end of the project, you have something more than just experience on the job. You have a credential that allows you to get those jobs and maintain that income level that you want to have.
Excellent. And there's also one thing I'd like to add too, and I think that educators have a role to play, but I also think, and probably more importantly, that parents have a role to play to make sure that your kids stay in school to get the proper education so that they can get the jobs that they want and not trade short-term gain at the sacrifice of long-term betterment. So,
maybe just one point, and that is that one of our recommendations was removing barriers. So how do we remove barriers to get kids into the trade? So we have such a diverse set of communities across British Columbia with different needs and issues and concerns. How do we identify what they need to make sure that they can move into the trades and have the capacity training that's needed before they even get to that point? So that was one of our recommendations, to make sure that we respect the diversity of communities and find the workable solutions that are going to work going forward for the next generation.
And I think, it is important as we move forward with the next iteration of this working group that we have First Nations represented on the working group. And again, we had the Haisla who were represented on the previous working group, but I think we need to have more inclusion in terms of going forward. Another question is, a lot has been said about the temporary foreign worker program, particularly in Canada. I think if you turn on the news, you watch CBC, that comes up almost on a daily basis. And the question I have is, it relates to that topic, and will temporary foreign workers be needed? And if so, under what circumstances? And Mark, if I could ask you to.
Great. Thank you, David. Another point about the working group is the honesty that was in the room on every topic that came up. So once again, let's be honest and clear with respect to temporary foreign worker issue. Will there be a need for temporary foreign workers to develop the LNG industry here in British Columbia? The answer is yes. But the goal here is to maximize the opportunity for Canadians. What does that mean? That means minimizing the number of qualified temporary foreign workers that would come to British Columbia. Now, let me give you an example. The best example I can give, the biggest project currently going on in British Columbia is the Kitimat Modernization Project, Rio Tinto's new aluminum smelter that the 14 trades are currently building. On that project, there are 92% of the tradespeople are from Canada. 92%. Of that, over half are local people, including Aboriginal people, and about 2/3 of that come from British Columbia. So the representation is phenomenal. What about the other 8%? They are temporary foreign workers. They're all from the United States, qualified tradespeople from the United States that have been accessed from the 14 local unions that are on site in Kitimat. So 8%. What about LNG? Well, if one project goes ahead, will there be a need for temporary foreign workers? I would still say yes, but hopefully the percentage is as low as the existing Kitimat project. What about 2, 3, or 4 projects if they go ahead? Obviously that percentage will increase. So how is this best accomplished? Well, first of all, it was really encouraging, David, yesterday to read in the paper and hear on the news that British Gas, Petronas, Shell, and Chevron have put together an association, not just for community and Aboriginal engagement, but for labor supply issues. That's significant. I'll tell you why, because if the 4 biggest proponents can get together at that level, pit crew presentation just referenced that as well, one of the roles of that association should be on the temporary foreign worker issue. Now, up at Kitimat, there's a group LMO process, and that's how the temporary foreign workers are identified and brought in. I would suggest that through the association and with the trades, that a group LMO process with the association and the federal government be put together. Now, what does that accomplish? First of all, it ensures that if the companies say there's a shortage, there is a shortage. So it properly identifies when there's a shortage, because none of us want an unemployed tradesperson at the gate of one of these projects saying, I've got my certificate and I don't have a job. None of us want to face that. So a group LMO with the association, with the trades, that means the shortages are properly identified, that means the workers are properly brought in, that means they get a full Canadian wage and benefit standard. And the last piece, which isn't in place now, but hopefully the federal government can apply this, is it would be a shame if the temporary foreign workers that do come here and assist in building and maintaining these projects, it would be a shame if they go home when the job is done. They need to stay here and build their families and build our communities and build our society, as Jim talked about earlier. So that can all be accomplished through a group LMO process. And quite frankly, the federal government doesn't have the resources or the inclination to do proper monitoring and enforcement, and that would all be accomplished, again, through an association group LMO process. I'm excited when I heard that, David, in the news yesterday, and look forward to working with the proponents.
I think the Alliance will have a lot of benefit, not only for labor, but also a number of other areas as well. Anybody else want to, Jim?
Just obviously this is a very controversial issue in British Columbia, and you know, I think we have to have a clear process. Mark has outlined out one part, but we were very clear at this topic there will be potentially temporary foreign workers brought in to work on these projects. But the only way that can be justified is if we've done everything now.
Right.
If we've actually set up the process and ensured everybody who wanted an opportunity got one, and done everything we can, and we've done that in transparency, so British Columbians can see, okay, we've done the best we can on this, we've worked together, we put the resources in. Recommendation 15 is very clear. There needs to be a process for making the decision about the temporary foreign workers. And our recommendation was to refer it back to this working group and the new structure we're setting up, and that they would sign off. So First Nations, labor, companies, government would sign off and say, yes, we need them. And so we don't have a big war over whether we need them or not.
Right.
Let's make that decision and make sure we've done our job first, so we can all look British Columbians in the face and say, we're not doing this to take jobs away from you. Because that's the perception that's out there now, and in some ways it's very correct. So we can avoid that, and we can do that only if we start today.
Anybody else?
Well, this is not unusual. I mean, we've had temporary foreign workers come in from the United States for decades. This is part of how we've structured our international organizations. When there's a shortage of a particular trade, we will first, if we can't supply that trade from a British Columbia local, we'll move to a Canadian local, and if we can't supply it from a Canadian local, we go to our organizations and locals south of the border. It's reciprocal. When there's a shortage of a skilled trade in the United States, a lot of our members travel south. The arrangements are already in place for a number of those members to move back and forth across the border. So we've used temporary foreign workers in Canada and in the United States for decades on particular projects. This is something that's not unusual to us. But we have to be cautious about just how we're sourcing that labor. We're doing gap analysis right now to make certain that those members from the United States who want to come into Canada have the appropriate skills, so that when they arrive, they're properly qualified and they're able to pick up the tools safely and be productive. So it's not unusual. We have to be concerned, though, about that we don't fall into the trap of sourcing unqualified labor from countries and just using it as a cheap labor force.
Mark?
In response to that, I think I'm really energized by the debate and by the fact that there is a lot of realism in amongst the different players. And that is, I think, what is the differentiator that British Columbia will be successful in pulling this LNG industry off. When you have these large LNG projects, you have a range of trades that are involved. And the shortage in the range of trades is different. Yeah? LNG business has cryogenics, has high alloy steel. It is currently not present in British Columbia. We have years to overcome that, but will we close the gap? Let's see. I'm an optimist. Let's make sure that we do everything, and it is what we say here, everything to grow the skill base, everything to open up the doors for people that are prepared indeed to go through an apprentice, train up, and be available as a qualified person. Will we close the entire gap? I think we're all here saying, maybe not. Let's be prepared and let's have an efficient system on how we then can bring skilled labor in from other geographical areas to make these projects happen. And I don't have to explain to you the burn rate that these large projects on a daily basis go through. So we need to have an and approach. Grow the skill pool, make sure we provide jobs to British Columbians, to Canadians, and let's also make sure that we are ready to bring in non-Canadian skilled labor if that is required at that moment.
Very good. And I think there's one question here, and I think we've pretty much answered this, but I want to make sure that we try to get to all of the questions that are being asked by the audience before we run out of time. And that is, how do we reconcile the wish to use BC Canadian workers with the fact that some skills and experience are only available abroad? And I think we've pretty much hit on that. If anybody has anything else they want to add.
Just
Well,
on
maybe-
that question, sorry.
Maybe just to add that having the experience inside the working group, the experience from Rio Tinto Alcan, the experience in Australia, sharing those best practices is going to be very important so that we can learn, as it was said by Peter Dybel today, we can learn the lessons of others and we can equip ourselves going forward to be more successful.
Jim?
One of the critical issues is the recommendation to the provincial government that they should also be involved in training. They're the biggest employer in British Columbia, and yet they have some of the lowest rates of apprenticeships. So when you say, do we need temporary foreign workers, the first question is, how many apprentices can we put in the system before the projects start? If the companies are committed to a 25% rule, 1 out of every 4 apprenticable trades would be an apprentice, then we'd like to see the $10 billion being spent between now and then on public projects have the same goal and the same commitment. Because if we put people through there, they learn the skills that then can be transferred to LNG. But if we don't do that, then the idea of temporary foreign workers filling a gap that we can make smaller is a problem for me. It's a problem for the labor movement too. So the job starts today. That defines the end game about temporary foreign workers.
Excellent, thank you. And a question that kind of follows on from that is, where and how does organized labor get a vote in this I guess is our task force going forward?
Well, go ahead.
Tom?
No, go ahead.
I thought we actually worked that through really well. We said we're all equal partners here. Right. We all have a role to play, and therefore the task force going forward, whatever it's described as, should have equal representation from First Nations, from the proponents, from government in their different roles, and from labor. And I think we really managed to work that out very well, and I think we're all very happy with that system.
Right. And with the working group, I mean, we worked on issues until we had full consensus. So there was give and take amongst everyone on the working group, and I would imagine the structure would work in similar fashion.
Yeah, and I want to say that the working group, I think Jim and Tom may have alluded to this as we got started, really there were some trust issues and wanting to make sure that we're all on the same page and that it was all above board and that we weren't going to be going to the press with what we were talking about, because they're very, very critical issues, and we built a lot of trust going forward, and we've worked really, really well, I think, together to get to a point where we came up with the 15 recommendations. And again, as I said, I'm quite pleased that the Premier accepted all of those 15 recommendations. Another one is, how does the panel see labor costs per unit of labor compared to other competing locations? Anybody want to?
Yeah, so I think Peter made already a comparison between Australia and British Columbia. I've been in different LNG projects in my Shell career, and of course we do that benchmarking as well. It won't be a surprise to people in the room, I think, to know that northern British Columbia is an expensive location to build. So if you look only to the labor component, sorry, and I shouldn't say the labor component, Peter mentioned, in fact, to have a unit package of construction item built, what is the cost of that? And in fact, the labor salary is only a minor portion of that. You have indeed the need for a camp, the logistics, the scaffolding requirement, the winterization because of the climate. And when you put all of that together, in fact, the total cost of the construction portion in northern British Columbia is, in fact, significantly more expensive than other regions. And in the numbers, it is, in fact, higher than what Peter mentioned between Australia and British Columbia. So that is a very significant element when we are looking as LNG Canada for the competitiveness of this project towards FID. Then it is not only, call it, that element. Peter mentioned the work phase planning, the productivity, the supervision, but it is definitely the predictability of the construction cost that will have to be, the credibility of that and the competitiveness has to be demonstrated before we can take final investment decision.
Great, thank you, Mark. Here's I think is a good question. How will the LNG project developers ensure that the work opportunities message is pushed down to the EPC contractors who will build the plants? Mark?
Well, in the end, I think we have to make that commitment. We have made the commitment as LNG Canada. That's where we signed the Social Performance Charter and our main contractor, CFSW, signed that charter with us. As part of the mandate that we give our main contractor, it is that they indeed cascade that commitment to all contract layers that will be involved in the project. So that applies both to suppliers and sub-suppliers, as well as to contractors and subcontractors. And on Friday, there will be a panel discussion on Buy BC, where LNG Canada will be represented, and we will give you more information on how we see that happen.
Sarah?
Well, I think, and it's probably the same way for you, inside organizations, it's really marrying up the technical team that's working on project execution and the non-technical side that works on First Nations, local engagement, making sure that really those two pieces of a project puzzle come together and that the message is clear from the folks that are on the ground, hearing from local and Aboriginal communities, we want opportunities, that message goes straight to the technical team, to the project execution folks who are responsible for working with the EPCM contractors and all of the subcontractors, so that really is a seamless integration of what British Columbians want is then reflected in the project.
Great, and I would also say that from BG Group that our perspective would be exactly the same, that it's working with the EPC contractors, the EPCM contractors to make sure that we have the contracts set up correctly going into the projects before we ever get started, so that there is a clear understanding of what BG Group's expectations are, and then it's our responsibility to make sure that our contractors follow those expectations.
Sorry, if I can repeat. I think it's important to say that it's a two-way street. So those companies, contractors that have that capability also have to come forward that we as proponents and as contractors, main contractors, are aware of the capability and the capacity, that we can work together with those companies to grow the capacity and get them, in fact, more involved. Peter gave a couple of examples there, teaming up with specialized contractors. But it is all about, I think, building the skill base and having that capability then also continue into the operate phase, because it will be important to rely and to really have local companies support the LNG operations.
Mm-hmm. And one other idea as well, and this happens on most, if not all, big projects in Western Canada, is to have project agreements, because project agreements cover from environmental to labor to terms and conditions of employment, wages and benefits, so there's certainty of costs, local contractors, Aboriginal, full engagement on the project, etc. So project labor agreements can help in all of those facets as well, through the proponents, the EPCM, and down to the contractors.
Another question, and we're getting close to the end of our session here, but another question is, which sub-trades do you see as having the most critical skills shortages, and what's planned to address them?
Well, plumbers and the fitters are going to be very much involved, the boilermaker. What plans are being pulled together to increase? I'm told that the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters could double their training capacity almost overnight if they had placements for these young people that they would take in. There are people that are, again, I said it earlier in my remarks, there are young people that are lining up at the doors to get the training, but without having the opportunity to place them on the tools once they've had their theory, we lose them. So we don't want to bring them in, give them false expectations. We've got to make certain that we've got placements.
But I can say, David, that each of the 14 unions on their own and collectively, Tom alluded to this earlier, are doing their own gap analysis, setting it up not only across Canada with additional affiliate locals, but right through the United States. So putting that in place. Unions have ramped up already their training, and of course they want to do a lot more training, but you need funding and jobs, as Tom said. So where will the gaps be? That's another, not sure at this moment, but that's another reason why the engagement is so important, that it happen early and that it happen ongoing. And so we can fill as many of those gaps as possible.
Great, thank you. We've got about a minute left, and so I wanted to wrap this up and really say I think that what we've heard today is we've got industry, we've got organized labor, we've got government, we've got First Nations that are all on the same page, that we all are working together to ensure, as I said in my opening comments, that British Columbians get the jobs first, that Canadians get the jobs second, and then we expand to other countries around the world. We have, I think, an extremely good and positive working relationship. We've got a very good and positive working group and, upon which to build the next iteration of this to carry out the 15 recommendations. And again, we will be, as a group, looking to government to make sure that we hold the government accountable as well to live up to those 15 recommendations that the Premier accepted. So again, I would like to thank the panel. I thought it was a very, very good and invigorating conversation this morning. And I also want to thank the audience. We got a number of very good and very thoughtful questions, and I really do appreciate your participation, so thank you very much.